In the former Soviet Republic of Kazakhstan, there is an oil deposit called Kashagan. It is located 2 miles under the floor of the Caspian Sea in a zone regularly pummeled by 60-mile-per-hour winds. In winter, not only is there moving sea ice, but the winds carry sea spray, which often entombs the entire offshore production facility itself in feet of ice. Kashagan has, bar none, the world's worst operating conditions. Kashagan is a vertical deposit, over 2 miles from top to bottom. Its oil is so high in sulfur that the crude must be processed once it makes landfall, generating miles-wide sulfur beds. Kashagan boasts the world's most difficult technical environment. Tapping Kashagan required that the best minds in the industry develop fundamentally new technologies to deal with the field's unique challenges. The consortium of companies developing it spent over $150 billion, considerably more than the entire annual GDP of Kazakhstan at the time, and 14 years before even getting to first commercial production. Startup costs at Kashagan are, bar none, the world's highest. The running joke in energy circles is that Kashagan is really pronounced cash all gone. Once Kashagan's crude is pumped up, depressurized, and processed, it is piped more than 1,000 miles to the Black Sea, where it is loaded onto small tankers for transit through the Turkish Straits to the Mediterranean, passing through downtown Istanbul before sailing on through the Suez Canal to the Red Sea. It is then reloaded onto long-haul supertankers that transport the crude another 8,000 miles past Pakistan and India, through the Strait of Malacca, and by the entirety of the Vietnamese and Chinese coast before reaching its final destination in Japan. It's a dicey route. Kazakhstan is a former province of Russia, and the two do not get along. Turkey has fought 11 more major wars with Russia, and they do not get along. Egypt is a former province of Turkey, and they do not get along. Saudi Arabia considers Kazakhstan an economic competitor, and they do not get along. The route passes by Pakistan and India, who do not get along, and Vietnam and China, who do not get along, and China and Japan, who do not get along. Oh, and there are pirates in the Red Sea and Malacca as well. Kashagan's export route is the world's riskiest. There are iffy plans to ship Kashagan oil east through a series of patched-together and patched-up Soviet pipes to extreme western China, before it is sent on across the 2,000-ish mile trip to the population centers on the Chinese coast. Considering that the route exposes people and infrastructure to temperature swings from 40 degrees below zero every winter to 105 degrees above zero every summer, it is unclear if this would be a logistical improvement. The bewildering Frankensteinian wonder that is Kashagan and its export route could only occur under the aegis of the Order. The Order has made everything so peaceable and stable and wealthy for so long that production and transport systems that would have been considered several steps beyond asinine in any other age are well within reach. It will not last. Kashagan's 500,000 barrels of daily output is obviously not long for this world, but is hardly the only production zone that faces complete collapse in the years to come. Modern energy in general, and oil in specific, is what separates our contemporary world from the pre-industrial. It separates what we define as civilization. Considering the transport conundrums that have held humanity back throughout the 6 millennia-long stretch of recorded history, oil is a pretty magical substance. Oil-derived liquid transport fuels increased our capacity to move objects at distance by a factor of 1,000. On-demand electricity, directly or indirectly made possible by oil, had a similar impact upon our productivity. For the first time in history, we could do anything and go anywhere at any time. Even better, for the first time, we didn't mean the most powerful empire of the era, but instead every individual person. Once your home is wired, everyone can have electricity at low cost. Unlike wood or coal, oil-based liquid fuels such as gasoline and diesel are so energy-dense and so easily stored that we store them within our modes of transport. Without oil, the American-led global order would have never had a chance, nor would have passenger cars, or global food distribution, or global manufacturing, or modern healthcare, or the shoes most of us are wearing. Oil's power is such that in many ways it has almost enabled us to ignore nothing less than geography itself. Almost. Oil is not quite that perfect. The restriction oil insists upon is not technological. Oil feels no obligation to exist in locations that are convenient. For the entirety of the industrial age, getting the oil from where it exists to where it is needed has been gnarly. In that, Kashagan is no standout. There are only so many ways to advance the human condition. One is to conquer a big chunk of land and make it your own. Another is to give as many people as you can within your society a stake in the system, so their collective actions support all aspects of the government and economy. A third idea is to drive back the night, and in doing so manufacture that rarest of commodities, time. By the late 1700s, the British were playing around with textiles ever more aggressively. The newer looms and spindles and spinning jennies had a couple of common characteristics. They were the newest and most expensive technologies of the age. It was important to protect such assets from the elements, and working them required a very keen eye both for quality output and to avoid losing fingers. If you've ever been to England, you'll recognize the problem. English weather is often wet and dark. London is far enough north that December averages less than 8 hours of light a day, assuming it isn't raining. And it is always raining. That made the interior of the cotton mills dark. Traditional torches would have contaminated the yarn and cloth. Candles don't generate enough light. And the long-distance backpacker in me can assure you that raw cotton is an excellent fire starter. The solution was whale oil. Clean, bright, long-burning, and easily contained within an appropriate lamp. Whale oil protected the staff by limiting injuries, while simultaneously boosting how many shifts a facility could run. The stuff quickly became the go-to for everything from church services to cocktail parties to middle-class apartments. And with the early Industrial Revolution providing Europe with food surpluses, humanity was quickly expanding to fill all available space, demanding more oil to light more church services and more cocktail parties and more middle-class apartments. Nor was the whale oil only used for light. The early industrial age produced lots of machinery with lots of parts that could get stuck very easily. To prevent damage to both man and machine, lubrication was the solution. The whale became a panacea. Light, lubrication, and some stakes on the side. Everybody won. Except the whales. Courtesy of Captain Ahab and men like him, creatures that once existed in the literal millions were reduced in short order to the tens of thousands. Fewer whales meant less whale oil, and the price of whale oil rose. The solution took two forms. First, coal. One of the common dangers in coal mines is methane, a gaseous substance that we know alternatively as natural gas, cow farts, and coal gas. Managing coal gas is a constant challenge for coal miners, since every time a miner cracks into a seam, there's a chance of releasing some hidden pocket of the stuff. Common outcomes are asphyxiation and explosion. Yet where there's a risk of something exploding uncontrollably, there is also a possibility of making it burn controllably. Add in a bit of industrial age chemistry know-how, and we figured out how to process coal to generate methane on demand. We'd then pipe it into street lamps, or textile factories, for light. We saw a fair amount of this sort of thing in southern England, the American Northeast, and Germany. The second and more widespread solution was something called kerosene. Unlike coal gas, dangers of explosion were non-existent, and you didn't have to be proximate to a coal supply, and you didn't need to install any infrastructure. You just needed a lamp. Early kerosene was sourced from coal. But the distillation process was far more expensive and dangerous than getting on a wind-powered vessel and sailing halfway around the world to do battle with colossal cetaceans before climbing into their corpses to hack away their insides, then boiling the bits on the same vessel and voyaging back, all while accompanied by a bunch of violently horny ex-cons. Near simultaneous technological breakthroughs in America and Poland in the early 1850s proved it was far cheaper, faster, and safer to source kerosene from something that at the time was known as rock oil. Today, we call it crude oil. We then turned to sourcing. Humanity had known about crude oil seeps since ancient times. The Byzantines used such oil sources to make a party favor known as Greek fire for their enemies, while the Zoroastrians preferred to light the seeps on fire to ensure that the party never ended. The problem was volume. Such seeps rarely generated more than a few quarts of the stuff a day. Humanity needed 1,000,000 times more, 1,000,000,000 times more. The solution bubbled up out of America. In 1858, one Edwin Drake applied some railway engine parts to a vertical drill outside of Titusville, Pennsylvania. Within a few weeks, the world's first ever oil well was producing more crude oil in a couple of hours than most seeps would in a year. Within a few short years, kerosene proved so cheap and easy that whale oil all but vanished from the lighting and lubrication markets. Then, we started applying material science expertise we had only recently gained from tinkering with coal to this new world of oil. It wasn't long before whale oil replacement kerosene showed us the way to wind power replacement fuel oil and horse replacement gasoline. Whale oil had many uses, and it took the better part of 7 decades for petroleum to completely eclipse it. Oil was no longer merely a product needed to push back the night and slick up gears. It was the material that allowed us to do everything, which meant we needed more. The empires of the day began a hunt, global in scope, for those famous seeps that had colored cultures throughout antiquity, so that they could drill the tar out of them. The northern seeps of Zoroastrian lands, contemporary Azerbaijan, were now in Russian hands. Their southern seeps lay in Persian territory, but that didn't stop the Brits from taking control. The Dutch asserted imperial power over the seeps of Java. The Americans had not only Pennsylvania and the Appalachian Basin, but also the wider Ohio River Valley in Texas. In the rough-and-tumble world of imperial competition up to and including World War II, control of such production sites were not simply an issue of critical importance, but often the difference between strategic strength and obsolescence. The commonality of these early decades of the oil era were simple. Either you had oil, and so could field modern military gear complete with the insane speed and range and striking power it granted, or you were on horseback. Thus, oil production sites were among the world's most jealously guarded locations, and everyone kept their oil in-house. Each country had its own major oil company: Compagnie Française des Pétroles for France, the Anglo-Persian Oil Company for the United Kingdom, Standard Oil Company for the United States. We know them today as Total, BP, and ExxonMobil, respectively. Their first and primary responsibility was to fuel the home front. To that end, exports were sharply limited. Foreign production was shipped home, and each country had its own internal pricing structure. Prices among these sequestered systems regularly varied by in excess of a factor of 3. The Americans, who produced everything they needed at home and so didn't need a globe-spanning merchant marine, were pretty much always on the low end of the pricing scale. Between the newness of the oil-related technologies and the criticality of the oil supply, World War II showcased resource centrality in a way unprecedented in human history. Empires used to fight over pepper because of the money its sale could generate. Empires fought over oil because they couldn't fight a war without it. The Japanese successfully captured Java in 1942 to acquire Dutch oil resources, while America's unrestricted submarine warfare by the end of 1944 starved the Japanese of fuel. The Germans' desperate bid for those old Zoroastrian assets in Soviet Azerbaijan foundered at Stalingrad in the winter of 1942-43, while the Americans bombed Romanian oil fields in August 1943 to deny the Nazis their output. America's crude oil came from the lower 48, not some far-off land dangling at the end of a vulnerable supply line. Not only did the American war machine never face large-scale fuel shortages, but the Yanks were able to keep their British and even Soviet allies fueled up. Without Pennsylvania and Texas, the war would have ended very differently. The way the Americans rewired the world at war's end changed everything. Oil was no exception.